Go ahead and start then.
Engage.
Alright, so we're speaking about the two types of Hamshacha. One is called the Shoresh, one is called the Tosefes, meaning in simple terms the light that comes from the Kav, which is all measured and delineated and reducing itself down to each world according to the parameters they can accept. And then you have the light called Tosefes. You can go into the infinite light, which comes from before the Kav, the Penimius of the Or Ein Sof, and you can draw from there as well through its mechanism of Torah and mitzvahs. And you can draw down a Tosefes. Why is it called Tosefes? Because it's an add-on to the measured amount of light that's supposed to be in each world. We then said that this is also akin to the idea of the Yichud of Abba and Ima, the unification of the mother and the father, representing Chochmah and Bina. And there's two types of Yichud. One is the external Yichud, where we said that it's a Yichud which is continuously happening for the sake of fulfilling the worlds. But it's a back-to-back Yichud, which means that the lowest level of Chochmah, that's what comes down and unites with Bina, and then this creates a reciprocal action that in the lowest level of Zah then comes down to unite with Nukva or Malchus, and basically it's a continuous minimizing as you go down from one stage to the other. And this is called back-to-back. And that's called an external yichud of Abba and Ima. Yeah, so everything that was we said yesterday, everyone's on board there?
Yeah.
Okay, so taking it from inside, the page Ayin Zayin, the line starts with a Rosh Tevos, Daf Ayin Zayin, that's interesting. Amid base, right in the middle of the big paragraph there.
Okay, the Tosefos, is this Makaf or?
It's Makif light, for sure, but...
it's inside the Kav, but it's Savoiv, it's around,
We talked about it yesterday, like it's beyond the light of the Kav, but the light of the Kav can transfer it. So it comes through, ultimately, the light of the Kav.
So the only way...
It's the Penimius of the light of the Kav.
Okay, so if you're in creation, the only way to tap into the Savoiv is through the Kav.
Yeah, you're stuck in the Kav, basically. But that's the thing, Hashem gave... Sovev. So Hashem gave us mitzvahs, which are also measured. This is the whole thing. They're also measured. Remember, we had this whole conversation, but the measurement is totally different. If they weren't measured at all, they wouldn't fit into this world.
Yeah.
Right? So, obviously, we're accessing things from this world. But the measurement of the Torah mitzvah is a different type of measurement. It measures the essence so as to enable the essence to find itself in a finite place. Whereas the original measurement of the Kav, it measures the essence in the fact that it reduces it and makes it at every stage it's something other than the essence. It distances itself from the essence through that measurement. But the measurement of Torah mitzvahs, which of course they're measured because we're trying to access them from our finite place, from within the Kav, but they are a measurement of something which is essential. And therefore, through the Kav, you pull out the Penimius of the Kav. Okay, so the if everyone sees where we are, Aval Yichud Penimi the Abba Ima. Now we're talking about the inner unification of Abba and Ima. Chochmah and Bina. Zeu Amshachem B'chinas Penimius V'Atzmus Or Ein Sof Shelamayla B'chinas Makar Le'olmo. So this is, in other words, it's still Chochmah and Bina. This is exactly what we were just talking about. It's still Chochmah and Bina, which are part of the Kav, but their inner unification draws from a light from the Penimius of the Or Ein Sof, which is above the source of all the worlds. So through inside of the worlds, you can draw something which is from above the source of all the worlds. As it says in the Likutei Torah, in the Maimer of Benikdashti, Be'inyan yichud penimi da'aba and ima, ein hakavana shamshacha hirak ma'aba and ima levad. So when it says that when Abba and Ima are having this yichud penimi, he says over there that it does not mean that you're not anymore dealing with just Abba and Ima. In other words, the father and the mother themselves, they are stuck in the world. Chochmah and Bina are part of the Kav. They're part of the finite world. But, so when they have their inner yichud, it's because you're drawing something from which is above both of them. You're drawing from something which is basically, in a simple sense, I guess you could say that the fact they can have a yichud panimi means they can give birth. They can have relations and give birth. So they're giving birth. It says there's three partners in the birth, right? There's the mother and the father and the Eibishter. So in other words, in order for them to give birth, they're really drawing on the higher power a tosefes, right? More than just what they are, something which, and this is drawn from Keser, and he says both parts of Keser, from Arich Anpin, the lower part of Keser, and Atik, Ad Bechinas Atzmus or Inso Baruch, and even beyond Keser, right up into the essence of Hashem. In other words, something is drawn into them, which is higher than both of them. Kamo Ken Bechinas Yichur HaChitzon in the Av Ve'ima, who Gam Ken Shenimshach Mekmea Keser. So then he puts parenthetically that reality is that even when they're having their external unification, it's also drawing from above them, from Keser, Rak Shezeh Bechinas Chitzonis HaKeser. But what? It only comes to the external part of Keser. Because we said, remember, everything is like external. Abba and Ima only have an external relationship. And therefore, Zah and Malchus only have an external relationship. And therefore, what comes into the world is only the feeling of Yesh and not the godliness. And so even that, we said, where does it all stem from? Even if you go way up into the top, there's the idea of the external and the internal of the Or Ein Sof. The external of the Or Ein Sof is the Kav. The internal is the Or Ein Sof. And as you go down into Keser, you always have this idea of Chitzonius and Peninius. So even when Chochmah and Bina are having their external unification, just to keep the worlds into play, they're still getting light from above them, but it's the external light from above them, and therefore it only creates an ability for them to connect externally.
Is the internal and external connection happening at the same time?
It could be that just the external relationship is happening by itself. But when the internal one happens, it doesn't negate the external one from happening. It just adds on to it.
So the external has to be happening in order to have the internal.
The external is not happening, there's nothing.
Right, okay.
The external happening is the yesh mi'ayin, basically. It's the ability for there to be a continuous creation going on.
Yeah.
If he takes that away, there's nothing.
So you can't have the internal without the external.
Right, that's also true.
Keeps it running.
Keeps it running. So what he says here is that even when you're having the external relationship between Abba and Ima, you're still getting from Keser, but the external part of Keser. What's the external part of Keser? So let's just look at this line for a second, just to be clued in. It's called the source of the Ne'etzalim. So what is the internal part of Keser? What's the external part of Keser? What's their names?
Arich Anpin, Atik Yomim.
Arich and Atik, right? Nice entrance,
Say that slowly.
right? External Keser is Arich, called Arich Anpin. Internal is called Atik. Just to give a little bit more to the Arich Anpin. Anpin means faces. So there's also Zer Anpin down the line a little bit, right? That's called Zah. So Zah is the little faces, and Arich is the long faces. The face is the idea of the Spheros. Zah is already called the little faces because they're contained, and each one sort of knows its own boundary, and therefore stops at a certain point and relates with other Spheros. That's Zer Anpin. In Arich Anpin, the idea is that they're long, it means each sphere goes on forever. Because it's beyond the worlds. It doesn't have to yet come into...
They're not connected to each other. So
it's
that's
not
like,
necessarily tohu, but it's a bit like tohu.
Is that like an Atzilus?
It's above it. It's Keser. Right now we're talking about is Keser of Atzilus. So there's really no... I guess to a certain degree it sounds like tohu, but lav dafka we're talking about the Indian of tohu, that they're shattering and so forth. Just this is the quality of the Spheros, is that they know no bounds. Right? So this is called... the source of the Ne'etzalim. What are the Ne'etzalim? Atzilus is just like we say, the Nivroim is the created beings. The Ne'etzalim is the emanated beings. So this is the source of the emanated beings, the source of the spheres of Atzilus. Arich Anpin.
Who are the emanated beings?
The spheres of Atzilus. That's why it's called Atzilus, is the word from word emanation. Now that's the external part of Keser. So it has this definition called the long faces. But then you have Atik, or Atik Yomin. Atik means, Ne'atak means to be removed from something, right? Atik Yomin, if the Yomin are the Spheros, right? Sheshes Yomin, Asa Hashem made the 6 days, really they're the 6 Spheros. So Atik Yomin means to be completely removed from anything called Spheros. They're not Spheros anymore.
Atik is also like very, very, very old.
Atik means old, which also means what?
Original.
Not mechudash. Like in other words, the idea of we talked
Always
about
have
it.
been.
Always there. So we talked about it as the Ezrach. If you remember in one of our mimers about Sukkis, called Ezrach Yoshev B'Sukkis. Ezrach was somebody that he's a native. He never left. He was always there. He's not someone new. So the spheres are so to speak someone new. Hashem produces them. So this idea of Atik is that it's in a certain sense it's the Penimius of Keser. It's beyond what they call it is. Instead of the source of the Ne'etzalim, it's the bottom part of the Creator Himself. So in Kesser, what you have, all Kesser is called a mamutza. A mamutza is an intermediary. And the idea is Kesser is trying to make a connection between Hashem and the world. So there's this thing called above the world, but below Hashem, right? Kesser is already, it's not Him, because He doesn't have any names. Even He doesn't have a name of the Kesser. But it's not the world, because what does the Kesser represent? Something which sits on top of the head, right? Even the highest part of the world, the head, this sits on top, so it's intermediary. So every intermediary has to have two parts. In order to make the connection, you have to have something of the mashpia and something of the makabel inside of you. It's like it says by Moshe Rabbeinu, he was called Ish HaElokim. And they say in Svarim, he was half man, half God. Because he was going to make the connection between the Eibishter and the world, he had to have something of both inside of him. It's the idea of a maturgaman. In the old days, when the sages would teach, they would say quietly their words, and there would be a maturgaman, a translator, and he would say loudly the words to the whole crowd. And the idea is that he was above the students, but he was below the teacher. Because he understood the teacher, but he could relate to the students, he was able to transmit the information. And you have this every time you have an intermediary, it has to have one part of the mashpia and one part of the makab inside of him. We just had last week's parsha, the union of Eliezer. He's trying to connect Rivka and Yitzchak, which is mashpia and makabel, or makabel mashpia. And so we said Eliezer himself was called a shliach dafka, because what's a shliach? He's someone who is bottled to the Mishaleach. He's all Rabbi, he's Avram, Evid of Ram Anochi, he says, I'm just a slave of Avram. And yet he was also a Bardas. He came up with his own rayas, he tried to figure out the situation himself, he was using his own ingenuity. So he had inside of him these two parts, therefore he was able to make the connection. So Kesser is the same. Kesser you have Atik and Arich. Atik is the lowest part of God. Arich is the highest part of creation. That's it. So that's what we're saying here.
Atik is the lower part of the Creator and no less than you just said.
And Arich is the highest part of creation. It's not creation yet, because creation, it's going to make the fusion between God and creation. But it has in it the very peak of creation, which is the spheros before they actually come into the world.
And Atik is above the Arik.
Yeah, Atik, yeah.
That's the internal versus the external.
Right, so that's what we're saying. When Chochmah and Bina unite, even in their external form, they're still getting from Kesser, but they're getting from only Chitzonius of Kesser, which is Arich. Right? Ubeshorosh Harishon, and even they get from higher than there. What's the let me see, I'll test you guys. What's the Shorosh Harishon of Arich? The external part of Kesser.
Rishon de lo yetida.
No.
No?
No, that's Adarabah. That's the that's like the Penimius part, right? What I'm trying to say is that if you go all the way up to the top, you always have Chitzonius and Penimius. No matter, so we started off Chochmah Bina has Chitzonius and Penimius. Zah has Chitzonius and Penimius. Now we're in Kesser, even has Chitzonius and Penimius. What's the stage above Kesser that also bears Chitzonius and Penimius, and what's the Chitzonius part?
Come on. It's the internal and the external. Of
Thank you. The external and the internal of the Orient Sof itself. What's the external of the Orient Sof itself? You can look at the next line, or you can just remember. What is the external part of the Orient Sof? We talked about it at great length, but it was in the midst of a longer conversation in great length, so I can understand if we forgot. The external part of the Orient Sof. Anybody?
You say hit external, right?
Yeah.
To start with.
Not Ratzon. Ratzon.
Aliyas Haratzon.
Opa.
Exactly. What is the Aliyas Haratzon? It went up in Hashem's mind to create the world. Remember we spoke about this idea of these like Esser spheres hagnuzos, these hidden 10 spheres inside of the Orient Sof. Remember those? Which is like he called hidden because they don't even exist yet. They're just like a theoret inside of the pool of the Orient Sof. They're called Malchus de Ein Sof. We talked about that also. How there's like sort of like a theoretical measuring of Hashem's self to himself inside of the Orient Sof. That's already the source of the Kav. It's the source of which could eventually be the Kav, before the Tzimtzum even. So that's even when there's an external relation, when there's an external connection between Abba and Iba, really it's getting light from all the way up at the top. It's getting light from Kesser, but the Chitzonius of Kesser. It's getting light from before the Orient Sof, before the Tzimtzum. But the external part of before the Tzimtzum, which is the Aliyas Haratzon. I don't mind saying that again if people seem confused. Do you follow me what I'm saying?
Yeah, could you say it again?
You can say it again if you want.
Should I draw it on the board maybe?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I got you all those new markers.
Yeah, you got
And your eraser is magnetic. You got to try it. You stick it to the board, it just stays there.
You don't have a
It defies gravity.
chairs there?
That chair, Dano, bring that chair. No, that chair.
Let's see if this works. I know we never did before, but-
Right here. Dano, bring that chair. Rabbi, this one.
Yeah, we got it.
You go bring it. That chair.
Now, if you had das ist 3D Models with 3D Models.
That's the chair.
I'm sorry, chair. I'm going to do that.
So, you know where those erasers were? Gone already. It's computers.
Magnetic eraser.
Right, you got to use the red and the blue. You got to use the red and the
Okay, you
blue.
want to open
also.
that?
It doesn't feel real.
All right, so just in general, we have here Chochma, Bina, and then you have this is a little shaky. You have Za and Malchus, right? The 4 quadrants there. So we're saying that
Yeah, that was worth everything.
Magnetic.
This board's not magnetized.
there you go. It's just a regular eraser, man.
That doesn't work very well.
There you go.
Yeah,
Thank you. So you have so basically we're talking about right here is the joining of Chochma and Bina, right? But that also has 2 levels.
You want red?
No, it's okay. Thank you. Got it.
All right.
It has 2 levels.
We'll try this again.
Chochma and Bina, it can be the external or the Panimi. I don't know exactly how to draw the external and the Panimius, but this could be external, it could be Panimi. Same thing here. These 2 also join, right? For the sake of creating the worlds, and they too also have an external and Panimi.
What is this the unification of Chochma and Bina do?
It basically makes it so that the light of Chochma comes into Bina, so that there's in other words, if the light of Chochma does not join with Bina, then nothing comes into being, right? In other words, it's basically the glue which enables the light which is flowing down from the Orient Sof to marry, right? It's like the father and the mother. So in other words, if there's the children are going to be born, there has to be a unification of the father and the mother, or there's not going to be any children, right? So what is the children? It's basically the world. The seven spheres is the world. So when the father and mother unite, they create the children, they create the world. But it's not yet the actual world of Bria. It's just the source of the 7 spheres, which is yet still at Atzilus. But they themselves, the source of the world, won't even get created unless there's a fusion between the father and the mother creating the babies to come out, right? So, but that itself can happen in 2 ways. One, it can just create the spheros as they are in their limited sense. In other words, that they come into be through the light of the Kav, each one becoming lower and lower. Chesed is higher than Gevurah, Gevurah is higher than Tiferes, and so forth. And this is the idea of the Hishtalshalus. So if they're connecting themselves in their external way, they're creating a Hishtalshalus level Hamshacha, which we said a moment ago is called Shoresh, which means every level down you go, there's a measured, limited amount of light which is fit for that world. Then they can have a Panemius connection, which means that while this world is still there, Chochmah gets supercharged, as we're going to see where it gets its source from, and it brings down a light which is more light than it was designated originally by it's like having a bar mitzvah. Not just having a child, but all of a sudden the child is like a godly soul. He's supercharged with the new abilities to bring more godliness into his kli than was originally planned. Right? So that's called the Panemius connection between Chochmah and Bina.
That's how we do mitzvahs, Torah mitzvahs?
Yeah. And the thing is, when there's external connection between Chochmah and Bina to create Zah, it also means that Zah only gives off its externality to create Malchus. So that when there's an external connection here, that it creates also an external connection there, which we said means what? That this is like the teacher who brings himself down into a mushal in order to make himself on the same plane as the student, which is Malchus. So he's holding himself back. He's only giving the smallest amount to make room for the student. And this is how it goes through the whole Seder Ishtalshalus, giving off the external. And that, therefore, we call that back to back. This is back to back, this is back to back. And so forth and so on. Now, what we're saying now is that there's actually whenever this is happening, whenever there's a connection between Chokhmah and Bina, it's not just Chokhmah connecting to Bina. There's always some kind of this is going to be like the Kesser. That looks like a Kesser, doesn't it? Yeah. And you have Atik, and Arich. Right? You have the Penimius and the Chitzonius of Kesser. So here too you also have the Penimius and the Chitzonius. So when there's a Chitzonius connection between Chokhmah and Bina, it's because it's only drawing from this level and that's it. It's only drawing from the external part, so therefore everything winds up being back-to-back and external. Right? But when you draw from the Penimius, then it creates a Penimius connection between Chokhmah and Bina, and then a Penimius connection between Za and Nukva. And what does it look like? It means you're drawing from godliness which is beyond the world, and you're bringing it down into the world. So at every stage, there's more light than was supposed to be delineated by the Kav Hamida in each segment, all the way down to the bottom of the worlds, where there's even more light in the Gashmias world than was delineated at first.
And it depends if it's Aliyat Aratz. Like it's
no,
not.
There's another level yet. There's another level.
But who decide or who start the ishtalshalut of Chitzoniot or Pnimiut Zivug? Is it back there in the Aliyat Aratzon, or it's somewhere because the
only thing that draws down the let me just go one more stage, and then I'll try and answer your question. This too, however, is not the source. Because remember we said this whole stage here is called an intermediary. Remember that? It's called the mamutza. And every mamutza has to have an aspect of it which is the lowest part of the creator himself and the highest part of the creation. Right? So this Kesser is called the mamutza, which means there's a whole nother realm over here which also has Penimius and Chitzonius. What's the Penimius of this area? First of all, this is the Tzimtzum Arishon right here, this little line. What is this called then? This is the Or Ein Sof. Right?
Where's the Kav?
The Kav is coming.
The whole thing.
This whole thing is like the Kav. Coming out after the Tzimtzum. But so what's the Penimius and the Chitzonius of the Or Ein Sof again? Right. This, we're going to pick like a little Aliyah Saratzon. We'll just kind of do it with like Roshi tables. Aliyah means it goes up in Hashem's will. So these are the Eser Spheres Hagenuzos right here. Okay? And what's happening is that even when there's this external relationship between Za and Nukva, it's because it's experiencing an external relationship between Chokhmah Bina, because it's only getting from the external aspect of the Kesser, and that's because that's only receiving from the external aspect of the Or Ein Sof. So anytime you're going to have this back-to-back relationship, it's because the only one being activated here in its source is Hashem bringing forth his Aliyah Saratzon, his idea for the world. But himself, which is beyond the world, he's holding that back. So when Hashem first initiated it, he initiated the worlds, and therefore the whole world came down in a measured way, in a kav, where the higher ones couldn't get to the lower ones couldn't get to the higher ones couldn't get to the lower ones. This is the idea of before Matan Torah. Matan Torah, it was the first time really, you could say it started with the Avos in a certain sense, but the first time really there was an ability to have this Tosefes light, where you could gain something from beyond, you could have the higher worlds present in the lower worlds, which is basically a Tosefes. It means more light is available in the lower place than it's supposed to be. That's Matan Torah. And that's why Matan Torah was preceded by Kriyas Yamsuf. What's Kriyas Yamsuf? Is the idea of the what's that?
The Kav.
It could be like the Nasira, yeah. But the Kriyas Yamsuf is the idea of you have the sea and dry land at the same time. The sea represents the hidden worlds. The dry land represents the revealed worlds, the lower worlds. And they're walking through the sea on dry land, which was this idea that they had the hidden worlds present in the revealed worlds. The higher worlds showed up in the lower worlds. That only happened because it was a preface for Matan Torah, where they're able to bring a Tosefes, a light which does not belong in the worlds, into the world. So Torah is the first time Hashem sort of released the Or Ein Sof through the Kav. Up until that point, it was only external.
So which is the internal, which is the external of the Or Ein Sof?
You tell me. It's obvious. The external is, of course, the aspect which is relevant to Spheros, right? It's like the Or Ein Sof is the infinite God, but not beyond Spheros, and then it goes up in his mind to create a world, that means there's already something like sort of happening. He's delineating some small part of himself which is relevant to the world. Now, since it's still inside of himself, it's far from a world. It's like a world as God. But still, it's already the aspect of divinity which is siphoned off for the sake of a world. World is Olam Lashon Helam. It's all about concealment. So that's called Malchus of Ein Sof, the Esser Spheres HaGenuzos, the Eliyas HaRatzon, Chitzonius of the Or Ein Sof. Right? All those are synonymous. I'll say them again.
What are they?
Esser Spheres HaGenuzos, 10 hidden spheros. The Eliyas HaRatzon, the going up of the will for the worlds. The what else did we just call it? The Malchus of Ein Sof, the lowest part of the Ein Sof, right? And I don't know what else we just called it, but something else we said in there. And anyway, this is the idea. And the Chitzonius of the Or Ein Sof, right? The external part of the Or Ein Sof. So therefore, why is there ever a back-to-back relationship? It's because it's all receiving its life force in its source from the back of Hashem, essentially. From that, this itself is like the mashal. You know, we spoke about the mashal here, that the teacher has to contract himself in order to be on par with the student, but that's really what happens all the way up in the Or Ein Sof. Hashem is already making the primordial mashal, if you will, right? To in his mind, contract himself down so he has some relevancy and relationship to the eventual worlds he's going to create. If he doesn't create 10 spheros in his mind of theoretical worlds, then there's no way that he's going to have any relationship with the world. So this is like a mashal. He comes down and puts his whole self into some tiny thing called the 10 spheros.
So the Or Ein Sof is above the Keter, right?
Yeah, sure.
And the term for the internal part of
It's
Or
just
Ein Sof is what?
Or Ein Sof.
That is the
Panemius of the Or Ein Sof.
Panemius. And the
Yeah.
external is called the Sephirot.
Yeah, it's called all those things we just said.
Rabbi, last time we spoke about the light and the darkness.
Yeah.
What does that?
This is light and this is dark. Exactly.
Okay.
This is called real light, and this is called dark, because we said dark is not really dark. It's just called dark because it shines into the darkness of the world, right? It shines, and it shines up the darkness of the world, right? So the reality is, there's even aspects of this light, to be perfectly honest with you, which is called dark. Because this is basically the source of Mamale, and this is the source of Sovev. Right? You understand that? Mamale and so even Sovev is actually called dark, we said. Because we said like a tzaddik, even though he's not refined. It's the difference between his skafi and his hapcha. Subjugation and transformation. Subjugation, for sure, is relevant to shining up the darkness of a person, because you're like negating all the negative aspects of your life and trying to bring light to your dark self. But even transformation, which is accomplished by the Sovev light, which is totally negates the world, it transforms you into a divine being like a tzaddik, still, that's relevant to shining up the darkness, because it's taken something dark and transformed it into light. There's things that are yet beyond that. And that's the idea of the essence of the light, which is not on the board. It's like this part. It surrounds the Or Ein Sof itself. That would be called light officially, actually. Back to, I want to correct myself. This like underlying essential light beyond the Or Ein Sof.
There's something beyond there?
Yes, it's the essence of the Or Ein Sof, inside of Hashem's essence. Remember, the Or Ein Sof is something that shines out of Hashem's essence.
Okay, so there's the answer.
So even both of these levels are actually called darkness, frankly, according to what we said before. Because there's two levels, remember we said all the time, there's two levels of light called darkness. The source of Mamali and the source of Sovev. They're all called dark light because their job is to shine into and refine and ultimately transform the darkness. There's a light which is bechlal beyond darkness. This, remember, now what Parshas told us, this is like, here is like Esav, and back here is like Yaakov. Yaakov, we said, is ish chalak, there's no hair. Taka today's chumash, actually, nice that we rolled into that. And here is called hair. Why hair? Because hair is in some way a contraction drawn off to shed light to some other thing. The hair is the idea of a contraction of the brain, which idea is it brings light to show it, to shine it out. So both of the Sovev and the Mamali are shining light. One is shining an infinite, one is shining a finite, but they both, in a certain sense, for the sake of the worlds, in a certain degree. Whereas beyond that is like the source of Yaakov, Ish Chalak, there's no hairs, it doesn't even shine. It's basically light which is only to Hashem, and that's what's called true light.
So Sovev is the source of the external or the internal?
Sovev here is this. What we've said up until that last piece, which I'm glad we said it because it brings the whole thing together. But it's a little bit confusing according to what we said here. Here, Sovev is the source of internal. The Penimius, it's the source of Atik, which will then become the source of the Penimius connection of Ab and Ima, which will then become the source of the Penimius connection of Zayin Nukva. That all comes from the Orient Sof, right? Yeah. That's called the Tosefes. But now what we're sort of coming to when we look at the long Hemshech of the Maimer, even the Tosefes light is still called darkness. Even the light of Torah mitzvahs, in other words, still called darkness. Yeah, it's kind of heavy duty
what
there.
What does the Pnimis connection mean? What does the Chassidus connection mean? Pnimis means it's for itself, and Chassidus means it's connecting in order to give to others?
No. In other words, no, you're switching the... we talked about two things. The idea of like Esav and Yaakov, and the light and dark. That was like what we brought in from the previous classes. And then all this class we've been talking about Panemius and Chitzonius. Both Panemius and Chitzonius are for the sake of giving. One, the Chitzonius gives the world, and the Panemius gives godliness to the world.
Well, it's all giving godliness, because when it's giving God.
Okay, but it's giving godliness in a Chitzonius fashion. It's giving godliness in a way where it's giving a concealed aspect of God, the Gevuros of godliness. The Gevuros means you have, of course it's God, even the world is God, right. But you have the world in a way where it doesn't look like it's God. That's also God.
And it's also passing the Panemius aspect of it, that's the art that's going into the Kelim, it's giving the Panemius connection, it's even the part of God that...
Well no, that's Tosefes. That's the Tosefes. Is everyone good on the board here?
Rabbi, Hagnuza means...
hidden.
Like potentially?
It means hidden, like hidden away. Okay? I'm taking the board away.
Thank you.
All right.
That was really helpful.
No, it doesn't
All right, let's try to finish this mimer. We got a few more lines.
Over there.
Here, just grab that marker if you don't mind. There we go. Okay. All right. So, the Panemius. We're talking about now how even when you're having the external connection, you're still getting from above Chochmah and Bina, from Kesser, but the external part of Kesser.
Internal.
No, from the external. When you have the external relationship between Abba and Ima, it's because you're getting from the external part of Kesser. And even that, it goes higher than that. It even gets from the external part of the Or Ein Sof, which is where we left off. Even B'Shorash Harishon, when you're having the external relationship between Abba and Ima, in its source, it's because it's a Hamshacha from Aliyas Haratzon, right? The will, Sha'al B'Ratzoni Yisbarach La'atzil, inside of that Or Ein Sof, that little circle I made inside the Or Ein Sof, that's where the external relationship begins. Because at the end of the day, even though you're talking about a light inside of God, it's still a light which is in some way relevant to the world. Why? Because it's His will for the world. It didn't come out yet and it's far away from reality, but it's shaykh to the world. Whereas Yichud Penimin to Abba ve'Ima, the inner relationship between Abba and Ima, this comes from Penimius HaKesser, Atik. And the Shoresh Shorsho, B'chinas Penimius v'Atmos Or Ein Sof. And the source of that is of course the Penimius of the Or Ein Sof, before the Aliyas Haratzon. K'moshe Kasuv b'makom achar shezeh ha'hefresh ben Yichud ha'elyon shebebrias ha'olam laYichud ha'elyon shebematan Torah. Sounds familiar. It's exactly what we just said. This is the difference between the higher unification which is required for creation. There's a unification basically between world and God, i.e. Bina and Chochmah, Yesh and Ayin, in order to create worlds. And there's a higher Yichud which is in order for Matan Torah to happen. That the splitting of the sea, so to speak, that there's also a connection point between God and world, where God actually flows through world into world in a way you can see Him. And that's called also a higher unity, but it's the higher unity of Torah, of Matan Torah, as opposed to creation. The Yichud ha'elyon, the Brias ha'olam, hu b'chinas haratzon ha'pashet hana. Where does the higher unification come about? In other words, Yichud means this sort of joining of Chochmah Bina. Where does that emanate from when it comes to creating the world? The Ratzon HaPashit, the will for creating worlds. That's the source. So that's where the light is coming from. When Bina wants to join with Chochmah, that's where it's taking its power from, because the job of that is to create worlds, i.e. to create concealment. Kav. Aval HaRatzu, the Torah mitzvah. But there's another will. Hashem has two wills. He has one will which went up in His mind to create worlds. He also has another will to bring godliness into the world. And that is a will which comes from the original light. That's the inner penimius ratzon of the Or Ein Sof. Now, I want to bring something back way to the beginning of the Maimer, whoever remembers. We said there was different types of will. There was a ratzon ha-muchlat, and there was a ratzon ha-pashit, right? And the ratzon ha-pashit could be in a state of giloy or helam.
Yeah.
Does anyone remember this?
Yeah.
Okay.
What is
I don't believe you.
It's like mate, lo mate.
What's that? Maybe I believe you. I don't know. You come in every other day, so you might have had a lucky day that day. What's that? Or probably we talked about it 7 or 8 days in a row, so maybe I do believe you. Yeah.
Is it ma'ir lo ma'ir, mate lo mate?
Maybe, but we're not. We didn't never mention that. Remember, we talked about the idea. You mentioned it, like about wanting to go on Aliyah, or maybe Lady mentioned it. You want to go on Aliyah, but you're like, it's not even in the realm of theoretical possibility that you're actually going to do that. It's just or a person wants to get married. He's only 14 or 8. You know, that want is not anywhere near any actions that are going to be taken. Remember all this conversation?
Yeah.
So there was the idea of the ratzon ha-muchlat was the ratzon which was inside of the Or Ein Sof, which didn't even come out. It was like completely irrelevant. Then there was a ratzon that came out, but that itself came out in 2 different ways. One was a revelation, so to speak, to Hashem's self. One was a revelation to the other. And that was called the Tihara Ilah and the Tihara Tata. The Tihara Ilah was that place, Aliyah Saratzon, that we just drew on the board. Right? That's the higher purity, it's another name tag you can slap on that. The higher purity was that Malchus de Ein Sof, or Esher Spheros HaGenuzos. And the lower purity was Ak. Right? After the Tzimtzum, those same spheros come out, it's now called the lower purity. But all of that is still called the will. And we discussed that even in Ak, it's still like completely general. There's not really any details in there. In other words, to actually delineate the will, it has to come even further down the pike. So those are all like 3 levels of will that are really still Or Ein Sof. But the third one, we never really said what it was or what it's all about. We finally just got to it at the end of this little parentheses, which is that if the Aliyas HaRatzon, that what happens in Hashem's mind in the Or Ein Sof to have a world, that's the source of helam and concealment and externalities in the kav, and that's the beginning. We never heard about a will before that, seemingly. It's like that's Aliyas HaRatzon. That's when it went up in Hashem's mind. Seemingly before that, nothing went up in Hashem's mind. It was just pure Or Ein Sof. But now we're seeing there is a will that happened before it went up in his mind to create the worlds. And that's the Ratzon HaMuchlat. We never actually got to it yet. Like, what is it? And I sort of drew it on the board as the not drawing. It's like the white part behind the circle, if you remember. That's the idea that there's a will deep inside the Or Ein Sof before he even has an interest in worlds. And it's a will of the essence, which does not have to do with the worlds. It has to do with Torah mitzvahs. He wants Torah mitzvahs. And therefore, he creates a will for the world.
So you want to live well, so therefore you have a will to make money.
Yeah, so that's called truly called the Penimius Haratzon Mamish. And it's in a place where it doesn't even have any delineation as 10 spheros, because the will for 10 spheros is not the will for Torah mitzvahs, that's the will for the world. This precedes the will of having 10 spheros. It's just it also measures itself out in the idea of the medida of Torah mitzvahs, so that it can come down into a world which is made of 10 spheres. That's like the idea of the 10 commandments. That even though the place the 10 commandments come from is innumerable, it doesn't have a number, it's infinite, he measured it, so to speak, so that it could be accessed from within the realm of the 10 utterances of the world. V'zeu hayichud penimi da'av ve'ima hu letzorech zivug zun lo lid neshamos. And now he says that this is why the inner connection of Abba and Ima, going down now back to Abba and Ima, when they have a inner unification, as I said before, it's like having relations. What are they having relations to produce? Ultimately a zivug of zun. In other words, that their inner relation should create an inner connection between Za and Nukva. As we said, when you have a connection of Abba and Ima in the Penimius, it creates a Penimius connection of Za and Nukva. What is produced when you have an inner connection of Za and Nukva? Souls. Right? Because when you have an external relationship between Za and Nukva, you create worlds. But when you have an inner connection with Za and Nukva, you create souls that can go down to those worlds and bring a light of God into those worlds, the neshamas. So that's why Zah and Nukva, it's like you have the father, the mother, the chassan, and the kala. If you don't have a father or mother, you don't have a chassan and a kala. When you have a chassan and a kala, and there's the idea of kissing and relations. Kissing is also a yichud, but it's not as fancy, right? In other words, there's the idea of it's kind of like a back-to-back, even though it's front-to-front. Maybe it's not, I'm missing something in the metaphor there, but it's similar. There's not a true transference, right, of essence. There's a transference of mind. It's like a teacher and a student is like kissing. You give over something, but you don't give them their essence. When you have a child, even though it comes from a lower part of the body, it comes from the yesod, but it has the ability to access the essence of the father to the point that it can create another human being. Kissing doesn't do that, no matter how hard you try.
Is it connected to zivug neshikin, zivug mochin?
It's bidiyuk. Zivug nishikin and zivug
mochin.
Okay, yeah. Usually it's called zivug. Mochin. What's the lower zivug of yisod? I'm not sure if it's called mochin.
No, mochin is the higher. There was mochin neshikin.
Yeah.
So souls are created by
The inner yichud of Zah and Nukva, as opposed, and therefore, where does that come from? The inner yichud of Chochmah Bina, from Atik, from the Or Ein Sof.
So the souls come from a higher place than the world.
For sure, they come from the Panimis. The worlds come from the Chitzonius. You guys are laughing at this? Don't worry, it's not sex ed over here. The Shorash HaNeshamas, Hu Bechinas Atzmus Or Ein Sof. The source of the souls, where do they come from? As I just said, they come from Atik, and then beyond that, they come from the Atmos, the Or Ein Sof. They don't come from the Aliyas HaRatzon. They don't come from the will for worlds. They come from the will for Torah mitzvahs. Therefore, the way they're drawn out and the way they come into existence in a completely different measure and quality than all the rest of the world. That's why a Yid is mamish not like anything else in the entirety of creation. This is explained elsewhere. Let's finish the Maimer. Going back, this is already, these last two Maimers are really like a little hemshech of themselves. We talked about the idea of separating the chesed from the gevura, you remember? And the idea of the back-to-back relationship that the teacher has to come down into the mushal, right? And then that's the idea of them being back-to-back. But the Nesira, when Adam and Chava were separated, that was the idea of pushing the gevuras away from the chasadim, i.e. making the student realize that he's lowly and the teacher is higher. And how did that happen? If you remember, we said chesed came along. Here, this is what he says. Remember we said chesed pushed a little extra chesed out, and he uprooted the trunks, the roots of the gevura, of the hay gevuras. Remember we had that long conversation about that? Yeah, so that's for the sake of sweetening the gevura. So the first thing he does is he shows himself to be the boss. In other words, at first he's coming down to this little mushal, the teacher and the student. The student thinks he's just like the teacher. I also understand fire and water. But all of a sudden, this teacher starts talking Kabbalah out of the fire and the water. He shows the nimshal, and that's showing extra chesed, which pushes the student away. It separates the chesed from the gevura. And this is called the nesira, the removal of the woman from the man. And what is that extra chesed? That's the light of the tosefes light. It's the extra bolt that comes from the asrus, the Or Ein Sof, which is beyond the kav hamida. That's what pushes the gevuras and makes them sort of realize their place, that they're just a student. Then the student and the teacher, the makabel and the mashpia, they separate from each other. The mashpia who is Zah, who bechinas gili or be'etzem. It shows its true self, which is that it's light, right? The teacher is just light. Really, we said Zah is built from the chasadim. Nukva is built from the gevuros, which means Zah is an expression essentially of Hashem's revelation. Malchus is an essential expression of Hashem's concealment. But when Zah is busy talking to the student in his own language, he's not showing his true self. Right? He's only showing his backside, which is also an inyan of gevura. So when now that there's a tosefes, Zah shows what it really is, a gila of or be'etzem. As we just said, that's what it means. Zah is essentially from the chasadim. It's from the side of shining as opposed to retracting. And therefore we also say that Zah takes its rightful place It's the last of the Olamos Ein Sof, right? Everything above Zah, we spoke about this before, this is like the true, like, role reversal happens right here. Everything from Zah and up is infinite. Everything from Malchus and down is some aspect of finite. Except when Zah is hiding itself by showing its back to back. So now Zah shows its true self. It's mamash part of the Olamos Ein Sof. The Makabel, which is Malchus, which is from the Gevuros, Hainu B'chinas Helam Behestra Or. In other words, this is a different power of Hashem. It's Hashem's ability to hold back His light. Like the famous mashal we brought out 10 times, the water evaporates and you suddenly see the calcium deposits in the kumkum, right? In other words, that's also God. But it's God showing something by hiding Himself, showing Kalim, showing Olamos. This is Malchus. When they have one wall between them, i.e. they're stuck together back to back, which means the Hamshacha is a Yichud Chitzoni. It's only coming from that external aspect all the way down the pike. That's what has been delineated from this, what's called Sod Shorish, right? The Kav light. At that level, you don't see any advantage that Zah has over Malchus because it's crawling down all the time into the confines of Malchus, not showing the true godliness. In other words, God is hiding. Everything is in a state where Hashem is not showing His real chassid. He's not showing Himself. He's contracting Himself. Turning the page. There's no clear revelation of light. And why is that? Because Zah is concerning itself with contracting itself to give over only its external parts to the student. And therefore they're both in a state of katnus, smallness. The teacher's in a state of smallness because he's crawling into the size of the student. The student's in a state of smallness because only until he gets this little information can he finally grow and one day after 40 years become like the rabbi. So everything is concealed and there's no inyan of Gilu here. The whole Kav is essentially Hashem showing His power of contraction. The whole Kav, even the light part of the Kav. Because the purpose of the Kav is to go lower and lower and lower and lower. It's always showing an absence of light, not a revelation of light. Because the whole light of Zah is only shining in a small way to contract to Malchus. Bechinas Helam, the Malchus, Mailu Master Love. And therefore, since it's going down to shine into Malchus, Malchus is like the boss. Malchus is calling the shots. The student calls the shots. Because he's like, you want to teach me? It's a delight for you to teach me. I'm sitting here, I don't know anything. You want me to know something? I'm the boss, basically. So therefore, the teacher has to put himself into the confines of the student. So therefore, Malchus, who represents the calcium deposits, ultimately, he is the ultimate champion of the relationship at this point, because the light is trying to reveal itself at the level of the student. So the whole experience right now is the concealment of God, from the top of the Kav to the bottom. Even from before the Orient, in the Orient Sof, it's the idea of the Chitzonis of the Orient Sof. It's all about concealment at that level, because the purpose is to reach the bottom. To the point that when it gets actually down to the lowest part, it does its job, there's no more light in this world. But when there's now an additional light from the Orient Sof, which is the idea of Matan Torah, all of a sudden Hashem changes the game. He says, okay, you got the mashal, now watch the nimshal. That's why it took 2,000 years to give the Torah, because it took that long to explain the mashal. Now here comes the nimshal. This is now a yichud panimi of the Orient of Abba and Ima. And az nikar yisron malas hazah. Then you can realize how great Zah is, what it means, light over darkness. And now shines the revelation of the Orient Sof. There's no more concealment. In other words, they disappear because the full measure of the Orient Sof can now show itself that it can be found even in the student. The student after 40 years can also come to the state of the Rav. There's no more concealment. Even below, there'll be a full revelation of Orient Sof. As we said earlier, it's not going to negate the world. But the world itself will not conceal God anymore. The world will reveal God. We already have a little bit of that, like Shabbos and Yom Tov. And through Torah mitzvahs, it's still a world, but it's the Ebershter's world. It's the Yidden or Mamish, not part of the normal world. We're keeping Shabbos. Which means even Malchus takes off her garments which conceal, which means the sediment of the calcium shows itself that it's full of water, right? It's just a dimyon. It's just a fantasy that the water disappeared. In order to bring out that there's calcium here. Once the calcium shows itself, it can show that the water never disappeared. I'm still a piece of calcium negated inside of an infinite amount of water. It's just that I know myself. It brings back the light. And it shines even below total revelation of light. That part's a little complicated. We'll have to get to it in 10 days' time after we come back. But Mazel Tov, we finished 9 mimers. We're going to start the Shir Chadash, the 10th song.
Safe trip.
10 days.
Yeah.